Hello and welcome to the local campaign. I'm Gord Martineau from City News. October 19th, Canada will elect the 42nd Parliament of this country, and Rogers TV is the only station producing debates in all of Toronto's 25 ridings. For the next hour, you're going to hear from the candidates of Etobicoke-Lakeshore. But before we introduce the candidates, let's take a closer look at the riding of Etobicoke-Lakeshore.
The riding of Etobicoke-Lakeshore is bordered by Lake Ontario on the south, zigzags along Dundas Street West and Bloor Street West to the north. It stretches from the Humber River on the east to the Toronto-Mississauga border on the west. Neighborhoods in the northern part of this riding include the Kingsway and the Queensway. Long Branch, Mimico, New Toronto are in the south. Recognizable landmarks are the Toronto Police College, the MasterCard Centre for Hockey Excellence, and Humber College's Lakeshore campus. The incumbent MP is Conservative Party member Bernard Trottier.
And now we'll give each candidate 1 minute to make their opening statement. This will be done in the order of the most seats by party in the House of Commons. And we will, of course, begin with Bernard Trottier.
Thanks, Gordon. First of all, I'd like to thank Rogers and City TV for hosting this. It's really important that everybody have an opportunity to see the candidates who are contesting this election in Etobicoke-Lakeshore. This election is going to be about a couple of major issues. One of them is the economy, of course. That's the most important thing. It underpins everything we do in our society. And also some very serious questions about what is Canada's place in the world. These questions come up with respect to defense, with respect to development, and also with immigration. It's also, I think, the important question for this debate is who is the best representative for Etobicoke-Lakeshore? We can also repeat what our leaders have been saying in some of those debates, but I think it's important to surface what are the critical issues facing people in Etobicoke-Lakeshore with respect to jobs and employment, and then also representing them in terms of infrastructure, cultural centers, transit, some of the things they have to face every day. Our party has a strong record of making those investments. I've been the strong MP in fighting for those things to making sure that we build up and build our community here in Etobicoke-Lakeshore. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Next is Phil Trotter from the NDP.
Hi, I'd like to echo Bernard's thank you to Rogers for having this debate. Important part of the democratic process, and we're open to having as many debates as possible. I'd like to say that I'm happy to be running with the NDP, a party that has a history of fiscal responsibility, combined with making sure we have a strong social system that supports all Canadians and leaves no one behind. Our current plan is for immediate, long-term, sustainable investment to grow the economy while protecting our environment, to make sure we have adequate jobs here in Etobicoke-Lakeshore, where a lot of jobs have been lost in the past 20 years. And we want to make sure we're building that strong middle-class economy, and also making sure that our social system is well-funded, starting right away. And as the economy grows, more and more funding going towards our social system to make sure we have things like health care, pharmacare, child care, support for our seniors, our veterans. We want to leave no one behind and make sure we have a generous social society. Thank you.
Next, James Maloney of the Liberal Party.
Thanks, Gord. My name is James Maloney, and I'm very proud to be running for the Liberals in Etobicoke-Lakeshore. I've been living in this riding for 40 years. I moved here when I was 11 years old from Thunder Bay, and I've lived here ever since. I'm running in this riding because it's my home. This riding is one of the greatest places to live in Canada, and certainly in Toronto. I'm proud to have a lot of local support. This campaign in Etobicoke-Lakeshore is about unity. It's an opportunity to have all three levels of government working together. I'm very proud to have the support both local councillors and our MPP. The Liberal Party is offering a platform that provides change for Canadians. That change can be implemented in Etobicoke-Lakeshore by enhancing the economy, providing better jobs for the middle class, and providing massive amounts of spending on infrastructure, which this country and our city desperately needs. So if you want real change in Etobicoke-Lakeshore, I'm asking you to vote for the Liberal Party and support my campaign. Thank you.
Next, from the Green Party, Angela Salewsky.
Hi. Are you tired of the drone-like soundbite talking points we've been hearing a lot of this election? I'm running because I want something better, and I want something different than the old line parties have to offer. I'm very concerned about the state of our democracy and our economy, how environmental protections have been systematically stripped away, how science has been dismantled and our scientists muzzled. how our rights and freedoms are being threatened under Bill C-51, and the lack of focus on diversifying our economy. The Green Party's forward-looking policies are ideally suited to tackle these issues, from creating a diversified economy to offering youth tuition-free post-secondary education, to safeguarding our civil rights, to a healthcare and housing strategy. It's a party that's always been ahead of its time, advancing principles and ideals to take this country from where it is to where it needs to be. We've been talking about economic diversification, and we have recognized that there is no dichotomy between the environment and a strong economy.
Time's up. Sorry. Next candidate, Janice Murray, the Marxist-Leninist Party.
Yeah, good afternoon. In this election, the Marxist-Leninist Party of Canada is calling on the working people and youth of Ontario to make a clear statement that they oppose the neoliberal antisocial offensive, that they want a new direction for the economy without nation-wrecking and privatization of healthcare and education, an economy that serves the working people with jobs, manufacturing, pension, cares for children, seniors, veterans, and those in need. We must clearly say we want an anti-war government and reject Canada's integration into Fortress North America. We can do this by rejecting both the Liberals and Conservatives. If we mobilize with a definite aim to oppose the neoliberal war agenda, it will open a path to hold any government to account. To the 50% of non-voting Ontarians, we say come out and vote, not for parties you don't support, but to make a clear statement against the pro-war austerity agenda. We say our security lies not in laws such as the anti-terrorism law, which must be repealed, but in our fight for the rights of all, and first of all, in our fight to participate in making the decisions that affect our lives.
Our final speaker from the Animal Alliance Environment Voters Party, Liz White.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, and thank you to Rogers for holding this debate. The Animal Alliance Environment Voters stands for a just, equitable, and sustainable human progress that respects, protects, and enhances the environment and the animals and the plants whose world we share. Human progress cannot be divorced from the protection and enhancement of the environment and animals. Humans are intimately and inextricably linked by biology and ecology to non-human life. To harm non-human animals and other living beings harms us all. I'm very, very glad today to see that we're going to talk about the economy. I think that's a really important issue to talk about. We promote the idea of a steady state economy. It is clear to us that ever-growing consumption cannot be sustained by the environment, and we hope that that discussion takes place a little bit bigger today. Thank you.
We'll now begin our question and answer section of the debate. Each candidate will be given 30 seconds to respond, followed by an open discussion. Let's talk about the young people of this country, and it is a particular challenge and a very daunting thing to be a young person looking for a job in this country. In 1980, 26% of young Canadians were living with mom and dad while working. They couldn't make it on their own on the money they were making. That number is now over 40%. And again, if you're a young person looking at trying to forge a career in this country, it is particularly difficult because the jobs that are available are either contract jobs where there are no benefits or they're part-time. What will you do to change that?
So youth employment is part of really overall employment. Young employees become middle managers at some point in their career. And we have to recognize that youth employment is a real challenge in other countries. If you look at some of the European countries where they have youth unemployment rates of between 25 and 50%, their economies are so burdened with taxes, it really scares away investment. And I think our model, with all of its flaws, is actually one of the best in the world to make sure that those opportunities are there for young people. It's going to be based on innovation, creativity, R&D, and what are the new jobs of the future that young people can get into, especially in the private sector. That's what's going to have to drive that.
Thank you.
We also want to invest in innovation and research and modern manufacturing, green alternatives to the fossil fuel economy and the oil-based economy. We've got a great plan to do so. Also, we have, I was pleased to see that Mr. Mulcair announced last week that we'll be eliminating interest from student loans. That gives a little bit of a boost as well. You're right, it's right now, for the first time in Canada's history, people's children are having a hard time setting up families, buying homes than any time before, and we have to deal with it. And you can trust the NDP will do so.
Thanks. It's trite to say that the youth are our future. Under the Conservative government, there's been 40,000 positions cut through the cut of the Canada Summer Jobs Program. This is unacceptable. The Liberals are going to introduce policy which is going to provide training, job opportunities for people graduating from high school, colleges, and university. We have to invest in our young people to make sure they get the training and the skills and the opportunities they need so when they can start their careers, they're on the right track.
Angela.
Well, we would create a Community and Environment Services Corp, which would encourage companies to hire young people. So it'd be $1 billion per year. And then the youth would get a year's paid of work experience so that they could get the experience that they need. To add to that, we'd establish a Canadian Sustainable Generations Fund, and that would invest in skills training, education, energy efficiency, of course, renewables, and emerging technologies.
Okay, your time's up. Janice Murray.
Yeah, we're talking about entirely new directions to the economy. So the starting point of that would be to develop a sustainable economy in Canada, including manufacturing. So the whole destruction that's going on right now and wrecking of that entire sector. So it doesn't mean going back necessarily to the industries that we had before, but it means developing industries in Canada and actually training the youth and so on. So programs to train the young people here so that they can actually take those jobs instead of bringing in temporary workers and so on instead of providing the training that's needed for the young people.
Liz White.
Yeah, I've done a fair amount of canvassing and talked to quite a few young people door to door, and I would say that largely my experience has been that young people are quite depressed about the state of their ability to get a job. And they certainly are completely disconnected from what I can gather from the democratic process. They cannot figure out how going out to vote is going to in any way help them. So we're hoping that democratic reform will actually happen so that people can be included, including young people, in the discussion about very real policies that are going to affect them directly.
Okay, we're opening it up to discussion. Anybody have anything they want to add?
Well, I want to talk about some of the things that we've done, actually. It's really focused on training. That's really critical. And something we brought into force is called the Canada Job Grant. And it's really leveraged the private investment in training and training people, young people specifically, for jobs in the economy, because there's been some real gaps in terms of the education people have had. We're partnering with the provinces. We now have implementation agreements with every province in the country. And it's really been a success. Huge uptake from the private sector to train young people for those jobs of the future.
I'd like to add that with the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement being discussed right now, you have the NDP standing out for strong middle-class jobs here at home. That's what's important, to make sure we have some good-paying jobs here, not just these internships or these part-time positions with no benefits. I remember in Canada where we had good-paying jobs, good benefits for people. People were not struggling as much. We had better-paying jobs here. We can do that again. Look at countries like the Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, all good examples of social democracy. Germany as well, capitalist country, but they've got good paying jobs, good benefits for people. We can do much better, and we plan on doing so.
The Conservative government has taken the approach, it's like raising your prices and then putting something on sale. What they've done is they cut the young job programs that were in place under the previous Liberal government, and they've introduced a new program with a different name providing less than half the opportunity. That's not the way you treat young Canadians. So it's one thing to say, here we are, we're trying to support our youth, but the facts are the opposite. They haven't done that. They've created less opportunity, less chances for these people to get on their feet. The Liberals are prepared to go back, provide more opportunity for the young people. In Etobicoke-Lakeshore, this matters. We have several high schools, we have Humber College. The percentage of youth in our riding is quite significant, and it's a very, very important local issue.
Well, we'd also like to see a ban on unpaid internships. They're finding it hard enough with all their student debt and then having to start out in the workforce being unpaid. So we would do that. We would definitely ban unpaid internships. But then with our plan, students wouldn't have student debt anymore because we're offering tuition-free post-secondary education. And that's not unprecedented. A lot of countries around the world have that. In Europe, and even Brazil has free post-secondary tuition. So it's something that progressive countries are doing, and we need to do it as well.
Yeah, just a couple of things on the question of the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. is definitely a problem. I think we should be withdrawing from these free trade agreements.
Why?
This one is specifically going to affect auto sector, manufacturing in the auto sector. It's also going to affect the whole farming sector in Canada. And we also know from history that the NAFTA is one of the main things that devastated the whole Lakeshore area since about '89 when it was passed. At that time, there were like thousands and thousands of industrial jobs in this area. We've lived through it. I'm an industrial worker, have been all my life. I know what's happened in the Lakeshore. The second issue is, in terms of what Angela's saying, that in terms of education, it should be paid for. It should be free to the youth, and a lot of the education, like for example, in one of the universities in Windsor, they have a whole institute on auto development of the auto industry. Well, that goes to benefit the auto industry. It should be paid for.
I agree with the educational aspect, and we'll get into that in a minute.
Yeah.
Do you have any fresh ideas?
Yeah, I think there is such a deep disconnect between young people and the voting system that I think if you want to get down to crass politics, when people are looking for who to pitch to vote for their party, knowing that youth aren't going to come out to vote in large numbers means that parties can disregard young people's programs. And so I think that there's a real serious problem. I mean, we're talking about youth voting that is well below 50%. When number of television stations were talking about it today, very low voter turnout in Newfoundland. It's the lowest, I think, but low all across the country. And so we have a huge disconnect between our democratic electoral process and the parties who are offering the programs.
Though. I mean, you know, when they look at the fact that there are no jobs available, politicians continually promising them things and never delivering. You know, they look at the whole situation. They look at the Senate and the scandals there.
Yep.
You guys are all a bunch of crooks in their eyes. Yeah. So you can see why young people are not enthusiastic about going to the ballot box. What about, I like the idea of free education. And for the simple reason that the more access you have to education, the more people who have it, the brighter minds you're going to have. Why can't we have free education in Canada?
Well, I think you have to consider that nothing is really for free in our society. It comes from somewhere, taxpayers' dollars. I think there needs to be accountability. When people are actually going to post-secondary education, whether it's university, college, some other kinds of training programs, they're investing in themselves. And if there's no accountability, then the money just gets wasted in many ways. And so I think it's important that people have certain skin in the game when it comes to their own education, their own futures. There's also the notion that you'd be transferring funds from people who aren't getting that education to the people who are. It's actually regressive to give free education to people who will be upper income at some point.
But you're eliminating a big segment of the population.
So
they're bright young people who have the intelligence and the potential, and yet they don't have access to education, so where are their lives going?
Starting with the 1990s, when the Liberals started cuts to the provinces, cuts of money transfers, including to education, the burden has gotten bigger for students to go to school. They walk out with huge debt. I know myself after years of law school.
And then there are no jobs when they get out.
And then there are no jobs when they get out. And it's interesting to connect it to what's being said about voters. In the Netherlands, where I think 85% of people vote, young people vote, maybe close to 90%, you have free university education there. To say it's impossible, I think is a stretch. That said, the NDP's plan right now is to at least reduce the interest, to remove the interest from student debt and work towards making education more affordable and contribute to and directly related to jobs. We have to also have colleges that are training for jobs that are out there.
Thanks, Fred. You have to engage people in terms of democratic reform, which we'll be talking more about later, I assume. But education is important. Everybody deserves a chance to go to college or university. Affordability is the issue. The Liberals just announced recently an expanded program for loans and grants. The grants, which do not have to be paid back, have increased, and there's a minimum salary level now at which you have to be making before you have to start paying back your loan. You have to give people a chance. So when they graduate from university or college, they're not burdened by massive debt.
I think it was Mr. Trottier talking about no jobs being available when they do get out of school. But there's one way we can quickly create jobs, get people to work with who have skills and such. And that was actually touted by Canadian Business Magazine when Elizabeth May was talking about this in one of the very few debates she was undemocratically invited to. She was invited, but undemocratically not invited to others. Anyway, Canadian Business Magazine said if the objective is to stimulate growth in the short term, then Elizabeth May was the only leader to recognize
time.
that. But I didn't even say what I wanted to say.
I think
What
I
I
would
was
start. I would
referring
start
to.
sort of from the opposite end from what was said on this question of the education and that people have to have a stake in it, because it's a society that has a stake in having an educated youth. And in this society, you can't get anywhere without at least high school education, probably without college education.
Yeah.
It's something which is required by the society. So something that's required by the society should be provided by the society, and that's the basis on which we're saying that. So the money that is produced, like the wealth that's produced, is produced by working people. It's produced by the people that provide the services.
Yep.
They should have some say into where that money goes, and it should
Okay.
go partially
Liz?
to their children.
Just briefly, I think many of the politicians look on this as an expense, and it's not. It's an investment in society. It means that we have a well-educated society that can be involved in any number of jobs and innovations that build Canada and make it a better place. And interestingly, a better educated public in a country generally votes for better environment. In the Netherlands, where there's all of this sort of stuff that we're talking about, they have 4 people from the Party for the Animals elected in the.
Yeah. All right, so they can do it. We
So
can't.
they can do
you
it, we
said
can
you
do it,
couldn't
yeah.
get to the point you wanted to make. What was it?
Okay, well, we could retrofit all public buildings for energy efficiency. That would be all hospitals, schools, universities, museums, all public buildings. And we would reduce our carbon footprint, and that would create a lot of jobs for skilled people such as
So we
carpenters.
would spend money to save money and create
yeah.
jobs at the same time.
Well,
Anybody
yeah,
else got any bright ideas? Let's hear them.
That is a bright idea.
Yeah, sure it is. Anybody else?
Well, we are definitely talking about taxing polluters and using that money with a carbon tax to invest in the green industry as well. We're very much eye to eye with the Green Party on many of these important issues. I'd say most. Also, we're talking about $4.5 billion in green bonds now so that people can invest in the green economy. There's no reason we can't have more solar panel energy here in the country. We've got lots of sunshine and stop our reliance on oil and pollution, essentially.
Now, why is it the Green Party comes up with an idea like that is totally workable and appealing, and the mainstream parties don't seem to want to come up with that stuff? They need to be prodded or whatever.
I know,
it is.
it takes them
Go
20
ahead,
years.
everybody.
Well,
Get in.
We've been
maybe I'll
talking
jump
about
in.
it
I
since
think because,
1983.
I think actually being in government actually means you have to be responsible. And I know that many of the parties on the left, all of my
We're not on the
all
left.
of my colleagues
We all
here
are today.
We're
all
not.
talk about grandiose schemes for spending a lot of taxpayers' money, and then there's reality that sets in. I think we've seen countries around the world that have had to deal with fiscal realities, whether it's Portugal or Spain or Italy or Greece, and we don't want Canada going down that path. We're talking about having balanced budgets, spending responsibly, making sure that taxpayers' dollars are used wisely. And so
that's why
you can
those sound
dream,
bites I
but then
was
there's
talking
realities we
about.
have to face, and the Conservative Party is the only party that's actually talking about really having balanced budgets, really keeping our debt and deficits
ahead.
manageable.
In the meantime, we're putting money into various monopolies and so on to give them breaks on taxes, to give them all sorts of things. That money comes out of the income of the society. It comes out of what's produced by the society. We should decide how that money's spent, and that's not how it should be spent.
We have to keep in mind as well that the Liberals and the Conservatives, a lot of the Conservatives, for example, they have direct interest in the oil industry. So if we're talking about developing the green industry, there's no impetus there. But the NDP's always been strong about alternatives to oil, and we continue to be. And we thank the Green for their contribution as well.
Yeah, you were going to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, look, if you want to get people back in school, we're talking about education here.
Yeah.
The way to do it is give them opportunity, and the way you give them opportunity is you make the families, you put the families in a position where they're able to do it. You give tax cuts to the people who need it. You give tax cuts to people in that middle income range, then they have more money to send their kids to school. They get more money for their housing. It gets the economy going. You give tax cuts to people who make $500,000 a year. Those people already have enough money to send their kids to school. You got to put the money where it is. It's trickle out economics, not trickle down economics.
Let's change gears and go to a different topic. Public transit. It's important to everywhere, but particularly for the City of Toronto, and every ward in the City of Toronto is affected by public transit. It's a mess. It's a joke in Toronto. And the reason for that is successive politicians have passed the buck. I'll let the next guy figure it out. because it may not be politically popular to say I'm going to have to jack up your taxes 1 or 2% to pay for public transit. You know, we all complain there's no downtown relief line. You can get on the subway somewhere up north or in the east or the west. By the time you get close to downtown, the subways are jammed. The people who live in the core can't get on the subway. Well, that's ridiculous. What are you going to do to improve public transit?
You know, when we had discussions with the various municipalities around the country, with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, City of Toronto, other big cities, what they said they needed was long-term predictable funding. So we put in place the Building Canada plan, a 10-year plan. It's the largest and longest investment in federal infrastructure, federal investment in municipal infrastructure ever. And so that's what they wanted. The problem with the Liberal plan, frankly, is that it's talking about a binge, an infrastructure binge for 3 years and then nothing. That's actually the opposite of what cities like Toronto need. We're there for the long term. And also I recognize is that they have to contribute their portion to make this a reality.
Yeah, I have to say that we also have
and
a
let's
long...
try to focus it as much as we can on Etobicoke-Lakeshore.
Right, and Etobicoke-Lakeshore transit is a huge issue. It's very difficult for people to get around. It's very slow to get downtown. We've been talking about relief for a while, but nothing's been happening. Some plans are on the table, but nothing's been happening. We want to increase that federal infrastructure funding right away to transit. Every year we're going to be investing money right away from the start, and as the years go by and the economy grows with time, we'll invest more and more. The Liberals were the first to cut it, and that led to where we are today in the 1990s, the cuts to infrastructure. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to spend a lot and then have to cut later. We want to grow sustainably.
This is one of the most important issues in Etobicoke-Lakeshore. That's why I'm so proud to have the support of both local councillors. Both of them have visions of infrastructure needs in Etobicoke-Lakeshore, but what they need is a partner in the federal government, which they don't have. We've had a period of 9 years now where federal government has not been working with provinces or municipalities. We've got some very specific infrastructure needs in Etobicoke-Lakeshore, particularly in the south part of the riding. The plan has been set out. My campaign has been very specific on how we're going to do it, and the money is being put on the table by the Liberal government.
Yeah, these infrastructure plans should have been happened a long time ago, particularly with the condo boom that we have, and there hasn't been planning for that. But we're also the only country that doesn't have a national transportation strategy in the OECD, so that's something that we would want to create as well. And we can create it through a Council of Canadian Governments, which is a signature platform of ours, so that we have all levels of government working together, because the federal government provides the funding and then can work with the provincial and municipal governments to get that into play. And so this Council of Canadian Governments would include, again, all levels of government, and then we talk about and come up with solutions for things like that.
Yeah, but basically, I mean, definitely there's a need to increase infrastructure spending, and definitely in terms of the Etobicoke-Lakeshore, the question of transit, being a transit user is a huge problem. So, I mean, we're not talking about being in government, so we're talking about what we think should be done. And just as one point to be made is, like, we have probably the lowest percentage of government funding in the fares and
lowest
so on.
subsidized public transit system in North America.
So obviously that
which
should
is inexcusable.
that should be increased, and specifically from federal funding. And secondly, I mean, one consider various possibilities, like it's the industries and so on that benefit from being able to get the workers from one place to another. So
I just think we should ask everybody a question about who took TTC here today. I take TTC everywhere. So I'm pretty, including in Etobicoke-Lakeshore. I think the big issue is talking about what funding for TTC. Capital costs are always great for governments. They like to fund a line here, a line there. But the actual operating of the TTC, the cost of the day-to-day operations, the track repairs, the upgrading, the lighting, all that sort of stuff, new rail cars and stuff. Governments aren't there for that money. That's funded out of the fare box.
Can't take care of everything. So go ahead, everybody.
If I may, just 1 second more about the community in Etobicoke-Lakeshore. I've been hearing a lot of people say that developments of condos have been prioritized by a lot of the city councillors or the city council, to the point where the infrastructure is not being prioritized enough. There's some community, a lot of community members who are activists, and they're complaining about that. So I will be a partner to those current city councillors, to the MPP, to whoever's there, but we have to make sure that the community's concerns are also heard. they're an important part of the process of developing in a sound, reasonable way and making sure that not just big developers have their way forward. We have to make sure that things like transit are taken care of and are prioritized.
There are a number of community activists, and the reason there are, Gord, is because it is such an important issue. And every one of those groups likes my plan. And it's a plan, it's a vision created by our local
Your
councillor,
plan is
Mark
premature.
Grimes.
It hasn't
No,
been-
it's not premature at all, Phil. And it's not, and I'll tell you why. What you need is you need a partner in the federal government. You've had a municipality, Gord, of you
We've been our
identified.
partner as well,
The
yes.
city of Toronto has been talking about
That's true.
transit for as long as I remember. I moved into this riding 40 years ago. We should have 40 new subway stops, and we don't. The reason is every time a city government comes up with a plan for transit, they then turn around and try to take up a collection, and they don't get it. We have committed unprecedented funding for infrastructure, and locally in the Etobicoke-Lakeshore, that is what we need. I was a city councillor last year for 5 months. I was appointed on an interim basis, and I stood in that chamber and I said two things. You need to focus on number one priority, which is transit, and you have to stop looking at issues as if they're left and right, they're right or wrong. And transit is the number one priority in the city of Toronto. You don't drive on the Gardiner, you drive under the Gardiner. What was the biggest explanation given this summer when they were having the debate on whether to tear down the Gardiner? We don't have the infrastructure to support it if we tear it down. We don't have transit. With the Liberal commitment, the City of Toronto now has an opportunity to sit and plan for the next 10 years with unprecedented commitment from a federal partner. And it's not tied like the Conservatives are talking about. We're not saying, we'll give you $10 if you give us $10.
The problem with that is, though, that we have in the City of Toronto now, thanks to the Liberals at the provincial level, a transit line that goes to Vaughan with no riders on it. It is not sustainable operationally. And so my concern is, if we're talking about money for transit, who's going to have the say about where these transit lines go? That's a real big question, because the transit lines that we have now, the one up at Shepherd, which goes to nowhere, and the one up to Vaughan, which goes to nowhere, we now are paying for that as City of Toronto transit users in an operation that does not cover itself in terms of transit riders. And that was delivered by a government who thought they knew better than the residents in the City of Toronto about what Toronto needed for transit.
So I just want to respond to some of the things James said, because I think the role of the federal government is not to actually plan the lines. It's not to choose the equipment. It's really to be a partner. And we've been a big partner in the last 9 years. 300% more funding than the previous Liberal government spent in 13 years. I just want to add that, because we've been there with billions of dollars for TTC and for GO and for regional transit, and we continue to be a partner. We've pledged $2.6 billion for Smart Track, which is a priority for the city, and we've been a strong partner. And I think it's important, and this is an important point, the Liberal plan, if you can envision a dump truck full of money coming and no accountability, it looks like the sponsorship scandal all over again. And that's why it's important. 95% of the infrastructure is owned by the municipalities and the provinces. It's not owned by the federal government. The municipality needs to be there. Otherwise, it's unaccountable. There's construction cost overruns. You need that accountability.
Conservatives have been a partner with the City of Toronto in the last 9 years. Where's the evidence? The only commitment I've seen from this Conservative government in Toronto is within the last 6 months you've agreed to come along and fund Smart Track. Mayor Ford couldn't even get you guys to cooperate.
Both the Conservatives and the Liberals have not funded infrastructure enough. Now that they saw the NDP gaining ground with promising to fund infrastructure, the Liberals said, we'll spend even more. But the fact is, you have to look at, there is a strong municipal element to this. For example, zoning. There was a community push to have a condominium near Mimico GO station. Part of the agreement was that they'd provide more parking spaces for residents. That just disappeared. I don't know what happened to that. But so there has to be, I'd like, as an MP, I would make sure we have community consultations twice a year, sit down with the community and invite the local MPP and the city councillors as well, and make sure those community concerns are heard and that transit is prioritized. But you're right, the municipal is involved in the plan.
I'd like to make one more point. I have a question for everybody at this table. The Liberals have committed to spending this money on infrastructure, and they've explained how they're going to do it. My question is to you, why aren't you trying to find the money? Because this is the biggest need in our city.
That's a lie. We have the money. We have a costed plan. We were the first party to provide it, and we have it slow and steady, starting right away, $1.3 billion annually, starting right from the first year, and it's a 20-year commitment, growing with time.
All right, I'm going to change gears now and change subject matter. We've been talking about money, lots of money, billions of dollars for this and this and this. So a great deal of money prepared to be spent for various projects. So we'll tie that in with the Syrian refugee crisis. We are being asked to open the doors to take more refugees into this country. And, you know, there's certain claims are being made, well, we're taking 1,500 or 5,000 or 10,000. Germany is taking 300,000 Syrian refugees because they see the need and they see the wisdom of doing it. Why don't we see it, and where do you stand on the issue?
Well, let me just say, I mean, Germany has a different path to citizenship. They actually don't expect new arrivals like that to become citizens. In fact, many of them have spent a generation just as guest workers. And so Canada has a different approach. When we accept people like that as refugees or as asylum claimants, we expect them to become full citizens at some point. And we've done a lot, and our response has been refugee resettlement. Of course, we're the 5th largest donor in the region when it comes to humanitarian assistance, and the military response is an essential element. Our allies are there fighting so that these people can actually go home someday, which is what they really want to do.
Mm-hmm. All right, next.
The NDP is committed to working with the UN and other international nations to meet our what the UN has recommended, which is to bring in 46,000 Syrians to do our part in the next 4 years, starting with 10,000 by the end of this year. And we're committed to doing that. Just to keep in mind, security is also a concern of some people who are afraid of bringing in refugees from that part of the world in particular. But we've got to keep in mind the CBSA does a great job at monitoring everyone that's coming in here. Security is not being neglected. Canada is a country built on immigrants. We can do much better.
This is an issue that arises out of tragedy. This is an issue that shouldn't be discussed based on Conservative, NDP, or Liberal, or any other party's priorities. This is an issue that should be dealt with on a humanitarian basis, on the basis of a Canadian government. We should put our swords down and we should sit down, forget about the election, and decide what can this country do, what should it be doing. And we've suggested that during the election. It's not happening. You're hearing various promises from various parties throughout this campaign. I honestly believe we have to put the partisanship aside and figure out what the right thing to do on a human level is.
Well, there are a couple things that we're not really talking about when we're talking about the refugees, and absolutely we need to make sure that we do get them here quickly, but we also have to be focusing on the development assistance to help rebuild in those conflict zones, and returning more to humanitarian aid. And also something that people aren't talking about is mitigating the effects of climate change, because in a lot of these conflict zones in a lot of these countries, they start out because of the effects of climate change, such as drought, which is what happened in Syria. It started with the drought and people moving in.
Okay, time's up. Sorry. Next.
And I think the Canadian people have made themselves pretty clear all the way across the country on this question that refugees are welcome here, and that's a starting point. So that's, you know, and it does mean that the party should not be acting on the basis of some political points, but should be dealing with a humanitarian crisis as such. The other aspect that has to be taken into account is, as far as I'm concerned, you don't we should not be in a role of bombing a country and then saying that how many refugees we're going to take, because the first problem is the displacement comes from the war in that region.
All right.
So that's
Liz?
Just quickly, I think we should take as many refugees as we can get in the door as fast as possible. They desperately need our help. And you know, you look at the news every night with people standing behind barbed wire, desperate to find a place to go. And we're saying, well, you know, maybe we can take 4,000, maybe we should be opening up our doors. We can do it. Other countries have done it. Virtually every municipality across the country has said, send us some refugees, we'll take care of them.
The floor is open. Anybody?
Well, I want to raise one other point on that, which is that right now the Canadian government is sponsoring virtually no refugees. Like any people that are coming to this country is based on charitable donations. So instead of the government playing a role in actually organizing it and all this, most of what has happened, to the extent it has, which is very few, has been on that kind of basis. And it shouldn't be left to groups to try and muddle together what the finances should be and find a way to bring somebody over. It should be a definite program. And this question of security and all this, I mean, it's pretty ironical when you're talking about people that are fleeing from bombing from Western powers to be asking them about
I'd just like
security.
to echo James. You know, I've been a little fiery at you and you know, holding your party accountable a little bit. But the truth is, what he said is very important. We need to find places where we all agree and work together, and that's what this system is missing right now. This country needs to see parties working across party lines on important issues that we all agree on, humanitarian issues, economic issues, everything we're talking about. That's where I think proportional representation can help encourage that, where no party has an absolute majority without having a majority of the votes, and also where all parties which have great ideas come and have to work together to pass laws. So again, so important to make sure we meet, that we work together for important issues. So thank you, James, for
maybe to Phil's point, I mean, there is actually broad agreement when it comes to refugee resettlement. We can talk about the numbers and the pace, but I think we all agree that Canada should be doing what it can in terms of resettling refugees. I think where we do differ, though, is what should be Canada's response in that region militarily. And I'll say that Kurds I talk to who live here in Toronto are very supportive of our government's position because they ultimately want to be able to go home. They don't want to have to flee. We're fighting alongside France, the UK, USA, Netherlands, Australia, Jordan, and other countries to make sure that this region can be safe so that people don't have to flee. And these other, my colleagues would actually have us withdraw from our allies, actually abandon them and let them fight the fight. And we think that Canada should play a role there.
Okay, related to that, another issue related to the refugee crisis in Syria. These people are not going home. Right. Once they come here, that's it. They have nothing to go back to. Everything is lost. So we were talking about youth unemployment, deficits, we're strapped for cash. How do you accommodate, and we'd like to accommodate them all, but how do you accommodate, I don't know, 10, 20,000 refugees when there are no jobs here for them? What do you do then?
Well, I mean, I'll start. I mean, I think once a refugee claim is accepted, people are entitled to work here, and we expect them to be able to work. There are jobs in our economy where people like that can work. When it comes to private sponsorship, that's been the model for Canada for generations. Other countries too, by the way. When it comes to state sponsorship, the government of Canada sponsoring refugees, we accept 1 in 10 of all of the UNHCR identified refugees around the world. So when they identify refugees for settlement, Canada takes 10%. We've done this for actually quite some time, and we've maintained that commitment. So we're a strong partner when it comes to sponsorship of refugees.
Yeah. That's why it's so important, again, to have a strong local economy, a strong middle-class economy, so that we don't have new immigrants or new Canadians competing with Canadians who are already here over jobs. We have to make sure there are jobs for everyone, and that's where the NDP, we've always been a strong supporter of a strong middle-class economy, and you can count on us to be prioritizing diversifying our economy and strengthening and creating jobs for everyone that's here.
Gord, thanks. This is an economic and employment question. It's not an immigration question. You're right. People who come to Canada deserve an opportunity to get employment, just like people who live here deserve an opportunity to have a good paying job. And that's what the Liberal platform is all about. It's all about expanding the middle class. This infrastructure program that we are talking about, it's unprecedented sums of money, but what it will do is it will create jobs. It will create good paying, working middle class jobs. And that applies to people who live here now and anybody who comes into the country.
But not for the refugees or immigrants. If we're going to be practical, one of the first things that they are going to need is language training, because presumably a lot of them are going to come in, they're not going to have a lot of skills in either of the official languages. So we have to start so that they can actually be able to speak French or English so that they can actually enter the workforce. So we'll have to give them that education first and foremost before we do anything else. So if we're going to be practical, that's the first thing we have to do.
I guess to go from the approach that we need to build a sustainable economy, we need to develop our industry and so on. That's not what's happening right now. So instead of looking at people that come into this country as some kind of a burden or capacity, like how many can we take or whatever, they're actually an asset. They're part of developing the country. That's how this country is built right from the beginning. Like 50% of the population or more, well, more now, came here since the Second World War. So it's an overall problem of how we develop the economy, whether we actually support, like even manufacturing sector and various other sectors. Like it's the government that allowed U.S. Steel, for example, to come in and buy out a steel company and then shut it down. So,
in canvassing, I talked to a number of new Canadians who are pretty poor, who are here already. And I suspect that a number of refugees, when they do get in, may be in similar circumstances. And I think one of the things that other countries offer is a guaranteed minimum income, so that when people come into the country, they can actually feel secure enough that they can begin to build a good life for themselves and for their children and family. And I think that we should consider offering that kind of thing. I know that tax is a big issue. You don't want to increase taxes, but the fact of the matter is there are some things that need to be paid for.
Well, we're offering a guaranteed livable income. That's another one of our signature platform offerings. So, and it's going to be definitely
That's a handout, though, isn't it?
It is not a handout, no.
That's what a lot of people
Guaranteed
argue.
income?
That's what a lot of people argue, but the fact of the matter is when you look at things like a steady state economy and different approaches to how we actually structure our society, it doesn't become a handout, it becomes part of the economic engine of society. People get the money, they go spend it on something. It's an economic
would a
driver.
conservative government be in favor of something like
so
that?
what we have a lovely federation, this country, and we have provincial social assistance programs that we're not looking to replace. The reality is that every province is somewhat different in terms of its economy, its cost of living, and so on. So those are the main sources when it comes to social assistance. There are federal programs on top of that. And I know some people would say, let's get rid of all of those provincial programs. It really doesn't make sense. We are a federation, and I think we need to respect what provinces can afford to pay in terms of their social assistance.
I think the problem with the social assistance, though, is you give people money that doesn't allow, it's not enough for them to live on. If you look at the CPP,
social assistance is inadequate right now.
it's
in the
just
country.
crazy.
It's not enough to live on, and then we want to make sure again we're creating opportunities for people. And when we're talking about immigrants, I've worked in part as an immigration lawyer in my career as a lawyer, and people want to come here. They want to learn the language. They want to contribute. They want to live the Canadian dream. So if we give those, it's not about giving handouts out to people. People want to build. They want to have, a home, and they want to have a job, and they want to do these things. We have to create those opportunities as well, and that's where we do need some government intervention to strengthen the middle class and create jobs. Absolutely.
And it costs more to administer all those other programs than if we just had one program. It would cut down on the administration costs of that.
The government can't come in and wave a magic wand and solve all of these problems at once. That's just not realistic. But the government's role is to provide opportunities and breaks for people who need it. So this is where the Liberal platform is so strong. It gives tax breaks to the people who need it. We're providing opportunity. Affordable housing is a significant issue in Canada. It's a very big issue in Etobicoke-Lakeshore. As desirable a community as it is to live, it's very expensive. The Liberal government is committed to working with the co-ops, making sure that there's affordable housing. And this goes to the point. People who come to Canada, they need to be able to afford to live. So they need tax breaks. They can get into the middle class. They need homes that they can afford to live in. And it makes the middle class bigger and makes the whole economy stronger.
Which brings up the question, and anybody can jump in on this. Could Etobicoke-Lakeshore, let's say 1% of the 50,000 new refugees or immigrants, or however you want to call it, because there is a difference between a refugee and an immigrant. But if 500 of them were to move into Etobicoke-Lakeshore, could the ward accommodate them?
Yes.
Yes?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes,
I mean,
with open arms.
Yeah, well over 40% of all the people in Etobicoke-Lakeshore are actually born outside of Canada. So it's a very diverse community, and people come from all over the world, and actually everybody gets along. There are no ghettos, there are no pockets. Everybody's intermixed, and everybody actually really gets along and integrates quite well, and they're really a source of strength for our community. So we can absolutely accommodate more, and we welcome more.
Gord, I went to high school in Etobicoke. I went to Michael Power, and I went to high school with people of many, many, many different cultural backgrounds. Etobicoke-Lakeshore is very welcoming, and we could absolutely accommodate anybody who comes to our doors.
It also has a good variety of for example, there are some co-ops there, affordable housing, largely set up by the efforts of NDP activists in the neighborhood in the past, in the 90s and
God
whatnot.
bless those NGOs.
They can do well sometimes.
Who was in power when it happened? That's
Yeah,
what I
all
wanna
right.
know.
You want to remind you
It's
of our
almost
Liberal friends.
partisanship, one-upmanship, like boys playing in a sandbox, arguing in a sandbox.
Right.
It generates ideas.
Well,
but,
it's not arguing. It's about holding accountable and making sure, like now for example, the Liberal platform, the costed plan doesn't show how much money would go to affordable housing that was released yesterday.
Let's talk about the costed plan. Yes. The Liberal plan is the only one that's realistic. I mean, it's one thing to go out there and make all of these grand promises and then say you're going to balance the budget.
That's what you're
Speaking
doing.
of
We're not
waving,
making grand provinces.
speaking of waving a magic wand, Gord, the
We're not
Liberals
making
haven't
grand
done that.
province.
We've prepared, to commit money where it's needed, and we're prepared to acknowledge that might mean going into deficit, something the Conservatives are very familiar with, I might add.
How can you, I'll just say, how can, and a question for both of you, how can your parties, if elected to form the government of the country, establish or continue the infrastructure programs which you have promised, among all of the other programs you have promised to fund if there is no deficit?
Right.
Let's go with you.
So I think what we've put in place. I mentioned earlier a long-term predictable funding for municipalities. That's really critical, which is the opposite of the Liberal plan. The Liberals talking about a short-term plan, a binge, if you will, and then nothing after 3 years. And that's not what municipalities want. That's not what they want. And then secondly, the lack of accountability. So we've always partnered, and these things are always done for very serious reasons, that there needs to be some accountability on the ground to make sure you don't have the massive cost overruns that you can often have. So these things are typically 50-50. All governments recognize this need, or 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 with the different levels of government. That's where there's a lack of reality in the Liberal plan, is where is the municipal money going to come from without raising property taxes? Where is the provincial money going to come from? The province of Ontario has its own deficit and debt problems. It's had its credit downgraded twice. And so they're not talking about partnering. They're just talking about unloading massive amounts of taxpayer dollars on the population with no accountability.
I get my turn here. You'll get your turn, James. The NDP is the.
Is this going to be opened up to anybody else?
Yes, of course. We'll all get our turn. We normally go down the line.
Follow the bouncing ball.
Exactly. I just wanted to say that the NDP is the only party that's looking to raise taxes on the wealthier corporations that make over $500,000 a year after expenses and salaries are paid and whatnot. And we're talking about a 2% increase. They used to pay 22% here in Canada. We're talking about an increase to 17%. They're not going to flee the country. Walmart's not going anywhere. The banks aren't going anywhere.
All right, we gotta
That's a
move
good
this
amount
along.
of revenue to put into.
We're running out of time.
Right, to invest.
This notion that the Liberal commitment is binge spending is just, it's factually incorrect. It's a 10-year commitment to spend money on things that need to be done. We've talked about infrastructure today. This needs to be done. It's not 3 years. It's not going to start in 8 years like many of the NDP promises. And there is nothing that requires.
False. Nothing starts in 8 years. It starts now.
There is nothing that requires the municipal or the provincial governments to pay an equal share unless you demand them to. The Liberals are prepared to step up and say, we are here to help you out.
Angela, you're next.
Okay, well,
Talk Mike Duffy.
don't even have to raise taxes to put into place any of the funding for some of these. How about something like a municipal bond fund where people can invest through RRSPs to create money and have that directed specifically to infrastructure and affordable housing? How about legalizing marijuana and taxing it and regulating it like we do tobacco and alcohol?
Colorado did it. Oregon just did it. Yep.
Washington?
They smell the money, aside from the smoke.
Nobody's talking about that.
Janice, you're next.
And I just lost my point, sorry. Anyway, we're talking really about, a different way of going about it because, for example, we don't agree with this thing of taxation being raised in the sense that the taxation really in the long run should come from at the source of production and so on. So it should actually be from the industries, from the manufacturing sector and so on directly. But it relies on a different model. It relies on, government actually planning in an economic sense and so on. So obviously we're talking a different field or a different way of looking at things.
It seems to me that most of the parties are just afraid of talking about tax increases. And there's probably a reason for that. I think when you call on people's doors and you say we'd like to raise tax to do this, most people say no. No, we don't want you to do that. But I think the difficulty is that we're not having the conversation in the direction that we should be having it. The fact of the matter is when you don't provide people with housing and enough money for food and so on and so forth, you're going to pay for it somewhere else, health care or whatever. So we need to figure out and have a reasonable discussion with people, the taxpayers of Etobicoke-Lakeshore, to say, we need to raise your taxes, but it's not going to just be a dump somewhere. It's going to be to actually mitigate. And in fact, it will mean that we will pay less on health care in the long term.
All right. Thank you very much. We're now going to move along to the closing segments. Now, this will be done in reverse order to the opening statements, and therefore, we will begin with you, Liz White.
Thank you. I just wanted to, we have a vision for the future, and I just wanted to read from the quote, just very briefly. It says, the essential problem is that, like it or not, politicians are the ones who make up public policy in the environmental field. Unless they are rewarded for doing good things and punished when they don't, there will be no incentive or motivation for them to protect the environment and animals. And that was said by the Honourable Tom McMillan, who was the Minister of the Environment under Brian Mulroney from 1985 to 1988.
Time's up. Janice Murray.
Yeah, on October 18th, we call on electors in Etobicoke-Lakeshore to come out and vote to renew their democracy and to take decision-making into their own hands. Vote your conscience and, above all, defeat Harper and make sure the Liberals do not come to power. We're fielding 70 candidates, so we encourage people to come and to visit our website at www.mlpc.ca and read our daily paper renewal update, which provides space for the missing voice of the working class to be heard in this election and afterwards.
Angela?
Elizabeth May has shown how we can be successful in Parliament as another voice to hold the other parties accountable and to influence other parties' platforms. We're the only party that doesn't have a whipped vote, so Green MPs can vote according to their conscience, and the rule is the constituents first, Canada second, the party third. So if you want something better, and vote for what really matters. Vote for hope and conviction, not out of fear, but for what really matters. So if you want, that's it.
You've heard a spirited debate tonight. You've heard an exchange of ideas. If you want that to continue, I'm asking you to elect the Liberals in Etobicoke-Lakeshore and across Canada. What you need is 3 levels of government who are going to work together. This is a federation, and we need everybody rowing in the same direction to get things done. That's why in Etobicoke-Lakeshore, that will happen on October 20th if you elect me, because I have the support of all the other levels of government, and you're going to have unity, and that is real change, and that's what we're offering. Thank you.
Phil?
Thank you. I'd like to start by saying Etobicoke-Lakeshore, for the first time in a long time, is a 3-way race between the Liberals, the NDP, and the Conservatives. I would remind people that it's not true that you have to vote Liberal to elect a new government. The NDP is a viable option, especially when you consider the undecided voters, many of whom are leaning our way. And we have a lot of Liberals and Conservatives who are for the first time voting NDP. I think that's in part because we've got a good principled leader with strong leadership qualities, and we've got a great plan to make sure all Canadians, no one's left behind, and we have a good, solid, long, sustainable plan for the economy as well. Thank you.
Bernard?
Balanced budgets, lower taxes, economic growth. We're the only party talking realistically about doing that, and that's important for Etobicoke-Lakeshore. It's important for the whole country. We're also the only party that really respects the different responsibilities of the different levels of government. Obviously, the province and the city have to take care of their business. As a federal government, we're there as a partner. I've been proud to represent Etobicoke-Lakeshore, working with my municipal and provincial counterparts to make sure we're there as a partner to help build our community, put investments in infrastructure, in transit, in community centers, and stand up for the communities of Etobicoke-Lakeshore.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here today and showing your interest in Etobicoke-Lakeshore and the voters in that ward, and wish you the best of luck on October 19th. Thanks again. Thank you. The airtimes, this is of course the local campaign, and the airtimes for the other debates can be found at rogerstv.com. I'm Gord Martineau. Bye for now.